This guy with a straight face just said two things that are completely indefensible and totally poisonous to our democracy and its history. Wow. Amazing. I literally don't get it. I'm shocked by this. I am shocked. I don't get the play. That's why I was excited to have Katie Pavlich on tonight, because I know that she doesn't get the play with the DSA. And I do get the play.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't think of a label that would be easier to attack than calling yourself socialist in America, but that's their choice. But I know why it's winning, and it's despite socialism, not because of it. What I don't understand, Katie, is why would he say this about Richard Nixon? Trump doesn't believe this. Why say what Nixon did? Not that bad, Katie. Not that bad, really? We're okay with what Nixon did now, yeah?
Well, look, I don't know what the DSA has to do with Richard Nixon or JD Vance, since they didn't really discuss that in this conversation. But what JD Vance is trying to do
No,
as
they're
a whole
two separate conversations. I'll talk to you about
right.
DSA. I just want you to explain this to me.
Okay, so I can't get into JD Vance's head. I don't work for him. I don't know why he said what he said. But what he's trying to do is distinguish himself from the Trump administration as he moves forward and wants to run for president in 2028, while taking the successes, and he's in front of the Richard Nixon Foundation. He wants to get these institutions that can help him with the coalition to win a primary, while also trying to distinguish himself as a successful candidate away from the Trump agenda and the Trump administration, while taking the good with him and being an heir to the MAGA movement. So he's trying to branch out in his own way to do that as he prepares for a presidential run in the future. I highly doubt that Richard Nixon will be a top talking point or discussion issue for the American people, whether it's in a Republican primary or a general election in 2028. I think there'll be much bigger issues like Iran, for example, where just today CENTCOM had to respond with force to the Iranians because they violated the ceasefire agreement once again. And so that will be a bigger issue, I think, than Richard Nixon and whether he did what he did, whether it was the deep state or not. You know, we all get things compared to Watergate constantly. I think that's been overused significantly. I don't think that Richard Nixon scandal is going to be the core of what Republicans are talking about in 2028.
I don't think that's the question, whether it's the core. It's why would you say something so stupid? You want to distinguish yourself.
Well, maybe you should ask him.
Oh, I'll ask him. But I'm asking you because you're supposed to understand the kind of the thinking of what this administration is trying to be about. The Iran thing is easy. You're treating a terror organization like a sovereign. You just agreed in an MOU to treat them like a sovereign. So you're giving crazy people who hate you power. They're going to abuse it, Katie. Surprise. What is really surprising is to say, hey, look, I'm different than Trump. I think what Nixon did was okay. It shouldn't have taken down the presidency. He was done dirty, Katie. Are you voting for me?
Look, I think that he was in front of the Richard Nixon Foundation. They clearly have the entire Watergate scandal laid out on their website. They don't shy away from it. They have lots of details about how it happened, the players involved. They also have a lot of arguments on their website about how they think that the record should be cleared and that they shouldn't hang this over Richard Nixon's legacy in terms of everything else that he accomplished. People who have worked for him, including Monica Crowley and Katie McFarland, believe that he was treated unfairly in a lot of aspects. So there is a debate to be had about his legacy and whether Watergate should define the Nixon administration as a whole rather than maybe his foreign policy or other issues that he dealt with. But the Nixon Foundation clearly lays this out on their website. They don't shy away from it. You'll have to ask JD Vance why he said what he said if you think it's so stupid.
You don't think it's stupid?
I think stupid's a harsh word. I think that he has thoughts about what he thinks. I don't think the comparison between what President Trump went through and what Richard Nixon went through 50 years ago is that helpful. I think what President Trump went through was actually much worse. He was attacked by the deep state. You had FBI agents during the 2016 election writing back and forth to each other about how they were going to make sure that he was never elected president. You had the FBI director at the time framing him in the Oval Office at Trump Tower. You had a number of people in the government undermining him. You had the release phone call of the so-called Ukrainian problem with Joe Biden and Hunter Biden when Hunter Biden was doing all of the corruption that President Trump simply asked about before he wanted to send American aid into a corrupt country. So I think that the comparison between the two, it's just there are two very different scenarios. And I think that comparing them is not very helpful to the average American who's not thinking about that in terms of who they're going to vote for.
No, I don't know. I think they're a little smarter than you're assuming. I think they like to hear what their leaders
I don't think they're stupid. I didn't say they're not smart. I'm saying I think they do care about this kind of stuff. I don't think the Watergate scandal is going to be a top issue when it comes to what people are voting on. Do you think that's going to be the case?
I think you're trying to belittle the argument. Do you really think that my argument is Richard Nixon's going to decide the next election? Of course you are. Katie, you're trying to cheapen it because you don't want to deal with it. I get why you don't want to deal with it.
I think you're putting words in my mouth. I'm not cheapening anything.
Okay, so let me say it a different way.
I talk to conservative voters all the time. I was on the National Mall today talking to people who are coming for the 250th. They're not worried about the Nixon scandal and the Watergate from many, many years ago. They're worried about their lives today.
Do you really think I'm talking to you about the Watergate scandal, or do you think I'm talking to you about a man who you may say should be president soon?
What are you talking to me about, Chris? What are you talking to me about?
Here's what I'm talking to you about, Katie.
Why don't you explain?
I'll say it again. I'm sorry if I'm unclear. JD Vance said the Watergate scandal and what Richard Nixon did should not have ended his presidency. That's a stupid thing to say. He committed a string of felonies that his main advisors went to prison for, and your party went up to him and said, resign or you're going to go down.
I'm not in a party.
So he resigned.
Okay, Chris, I'm not in a party.
I'm not saying that Watergate
I'm a registered independent. I'm not in a party, first of all.
Okay.
Second of all,
apology. What I'm saying is,
what is a problem is the Democratic Socialists of America who won elections this week.
I thought we'd get to
who
it.
believe in bringing Palestinian-style violence to the streets of America. Who want to destroy the country. But you want to keep talking about the Richard Nixon Watergate scandal from many, many years ago.
No, I want to talk about both. Because let me tell you something. Let me show
accuse me of belittling the American voter and not thinking they're smart enough to understand the differences between these things.
That's how I took what you said, and let me show you how I'll do it differently. You just mentioned the DSA. I would never vote for them, but let me tell you why they're winning. If you were to stand up and say, listen, I think that Palestinians should kill as many Jews as they could, you're not going to get elected. If you stand up and say, you know, I think that Hamas's terrorism is a good thing. I definitely don't think that it's enough not to vote for somebody. I don't think you're getting elected. And none of those DSA people say that. They say things I find ugly and objectionable. They're winning despite it.
That's not true.
What JD Vance just did is say that the high watermark for corruption in American history doesn't impress me and shouldn't have ended the guy's presidency. I'm not relitigating Watergate. I don't need to. I'm not saying that people are going to talk about Watergate. I'm saying that a man that many people in the Republican Party think should be the next president just said he doesn't think what Richard Nixon did was so bad. And that's crazy and stupid to say.
Okay.
Now, the DSA is also doing something crazy and stupid.
To say that America should be destroyed and that Western civilization should be taken down from within, and that we should undermine and eradicate America as we know it, that there's nothing short of the total collapse of the structure and the American, quote, empire itself. These people are getting elected in real positions in New York, and they're not people who want lower rent. They want to destroy the country. And you're talking about the Watergate scandal. They
want both. And just like when I finally got a grip on MAGA, you know, months earlier than many other people, which is why I kept saying, well, I put it this way. I made a lot of money off $1 bets that Trump was going to beat Hillary Clinton. When a lot of people didn't. It's kind of the stuff of Cuomo mythology. Why did I think that? Because I realized that the ugly things that I saw coming out of MAGA, the prejudice, the white nationalism, the Christian nationalism, that was the few.
That was made up by the Southern Poverty Law Center?
No, it wasn't made up. Oh, please, Katie.
Yeah, the Charlottesville rally was led by the Southern Poverty Law Center.
If you think white nationalism is made up by the Southern Poverty Law Center, no wonder you don't have a problem with what JD Vance said about Nixon.
The kind you're talking about in MAGA it's made up by the Southern Poverty Law Center. It absolutely was.
So there are no real bigots in MAGA.
And an indictment by DOJ to show it.
So there are no real bigots in MAGA. There are no real white nationalists. They've all been put up to it by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Like January 6th was an inside job by the FBI.
That's what the indictment says.
What indictment says? What indictment says that the FBI did January 6th? I love hearing the conspiracies.
I was talking about the indictment of the Southern Poverty Law Center in Alabama, which details how the Southern Poverty Law Center specifically paid the organizer of the Charlottesville rally to take people to and from to make up this fake hate rally that they then used against the president and the right for years. SPLC has been accusing conservatives and the right of false white supremacy for over a decade and defrauding their donors.
If you don't think there's
by
white
buying
supremacy,
things like
if you think they
lumber
created
KKK
white supremacy, if you think the Southern Poverty Law Center created white supremacy,
they did. It's
you go with that, Katie. I'll tell you what, because I've met a lot of people with dead family members in the South who don't think the Southern Poverty Law Center is responsible.
It's about SPLC
First of all,
and the left
an indictment,
manufacturing their political arguments.
An indictment, not to mansplain, but an indictment is a charging document. It's a bunch of allegations, not facts. And they are not even charged with doing anything like organizing it.
Thank you very much.
Well, then don't make it sound like it's a fact, because it's not a fact. If you know what it is, then you know you shouldn't represent it as a matter of fact, right?
Okay, Chris, I don't need you to lecture me about belittling the American people, talking to me about how I don't know what an indictment is. I've been working in this industry for 20 years, and you sitting here and acting like I don't know what I'm talking about is ridiculous. It's absurd.
No,
you're being very disrespectful.
Well, listen, I don't mean it that way, Katie. I want to try to get to what's behind some of these arguments. Like, I think going after the Southern Poverty Law Center,
I don't think you're doing the best way.
I think that's dangerous. I think JD Vance saying it's okay to commit a burglary
funding false white supremacy
is dangerous.
And falsely accusing conservatives of white supremacy is dangerous. I think saying that people are hateful, like Charlie Kirk, putting him on a hate watch map is dangerous, and he lost his life as a result of this fomenting of this fake
he was killed for what he believed.
We've seen terrorizing the right forever from places like the Southern Poverty Law Center, which, yes, have been indicted by a grand jury, by the Department of Justice, that lists a set of facts they will use in federal court, in front of a judge, and in front of juries to make their case. That is real.
They're not
and
facts.
If you want to deny it, you can, but it is a fact.
No.
What
That's
are
not
they
fact.
They're just
an
made
allegation.
Up? They're made up? What are they?
An allegation is an uncorroborated suggestion that must be proven at trial by material and competent evidence that is found compelling to a judge or a jury. Otherwise, it's just a charging document. But an indictment doesn't have facts. An indictment is putting something forward that they'll believe they'll prove as a matter of fact. Maybe, we'll see. And if they show that the Southern Poverty Law Center set up the Charlottesville thing, they should all go to prison. If they can show beyond a reasonable doubt that people at the Southern Poverty Law Center created hate groups, they should all go to prison, Katie. I'm here for it. And if you get that story, I will have you lead the whole show. I'll be your correspondent on it.
Well, I have my own
you
show
can have
at
my
10
whole
PM,
hour.
so I appreciate that.
I know, but I'm saying I'd give you both hours.
At 10 o'clock. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Because I want that. I want us to get to a place where we just call right and wrong everywhere. If the Southern Poverty Law Center did that, wrong. If Biden did it, wrong. If the Democrats did it,
maybe you should accept that it's a real indictment and take the facts seriously.
I believe that it's a real indictment. An indictment is not a set of facts. And a lot of times they can't prove it. So, look, isn't that your point about Trump? Just because he was indicted, do you believe he was guilty of everything he was accused of in the indictments?
There were some of the facts that were proven to be true and some of them that were not. And a lot of them were developed in a false nature by political actors who we saw for years and years and years tried to keep the president out of politics while they claimed they were for democracy and preserving this right that we have, while they destroyed his reputation with false smears. When it comes to the Southern Poverty Law Center, over 10 decades, we know what happened. There are many examples of people talking in detail about things that were happening to them and the terrorizing the SPLC did to them and put them on maps, like the Focus on the Family was terrorized. There were a number of people who testified as a result of this out of court for years about what the SPLC was doing. So that is real. If you want to go back into what Trump was indicted for, we have litigated that over and over again. That was a political witch hunt.
I'm not relitigating it. I'm not relitigating it. Here's what I'm saying. Trump was indicted. Everything in the indictment was not true. I agree with you. The Southern Poverty Law Center
I think comparing
has been indicted.
I think you're making an absurd comparison between the SPLC indictment and the indictment against President Trump. They are not comparable in any way. It's completely different scenarios, completely different political arenas, completely different contexts in terms of years of what had happened before the SPLC indictment. And I look forward to talking more about it and exposing those facts.
Well, listen, I'm here for it because we got to get to a place of right and wrong. I don't play favorites with it. I promise you that. And I only like having you here because I think you're very good at explaining what is happening from that perspective.
Well, that's not what you said in the first half of this segment. So
no,
I appreciate you saying that now. Thank you.
All I said, it's all I ever say whenever I talk about you. I think you're doing a great job, and I think you're a great, it's great to have us here to be able to do this, in my opinion. But all I'm saying is, for you to put forward that what Vance is saying doesn't mean what it obviously means, I think is assuming that the people hearing it are stupid. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you think people are stupid.
I don't know why you're asking me to speak for him.
No, I was just helping you to help me understand it, and you did. You told me why you think he's putting himself out there as different. I get it, and you're always welcome to make the case.
All right, your producer's saying we got to go. So I'm going to say we got to go. Thank you for having me on your show. I appreciate it. I don't want to get yelled at anymore.
You're always welcome. And Katie does have her own show, 10 p.m. every night at NewsNation. Definitely worth a watch. Katie, thank you. Have a good weekend. Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.